On the M4, the westbound entry slip partly blocked to the M49 northwest of Bristol, of course, where a car's broken down, and the M27 in Hampshire is blocked eastbound between the M3 and Junction 5, the Southampton exit, where a lorry's caught fire, and Transport for Wales can't run between Corriton and Cardiff Queen Street due to problems with the signals. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, GBNews.com.
This is your chance to good luck.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us! Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
A very good evening to you. I'm Martin Daubry and this is GBN Tonight. On tonight's show, Germany's controversial Alternative for Deutschland party has won its first ever state election. But are we seeing the rise of the far right, or is this a political pushback onto uncontrolled migration? I'll be speaking to the co-founder of the AfD party shortly. Also this evening, the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has slammed rioters and called them racist over the recent disorder across the nation. A huge row then erupted in the Commons when Shadow Home Secretary James Cleverly blasted the government's handling of the riots and even brought up Black Lives Matter. Next up, the former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn forms a parliamentary group with 4 other pro-Gaza independent MPs to put pressure on Sir Keir Starmer. Are we seeing a new move towards sectarian politics? Welcome to the show. Thanks for your company. We've got a fantastic show ahead of us. All of that and more to come. So please do get in touch with your thoughts on tonight's topics. You know what to do. gbnews.com/your say. I'll read out the best comments before the end of the show. But first, it's your headlines with Will Hollis.
Good evening. Your top stories tonight at 7 o'clock. The Home Secretary has called the people who are targeting people on the streets of Britain because of their colour of their skin as disgraceful. Yvette Cooper updated Parliament on the government's response to riots which erupted across the UK following the killing of 3 children in Southport. The Home Secretary referred to rioters as racists, calling them thugs.
In Bolton, clashes between rival groups involved fireworks and bottles thrown. And we saw people targeted on the streets because of the colour of their skin. This disgraceful disorder and racist hatred, including that whipped up by a hateful minority online, was an insult to those grieving over Southport.
It comes as the wife of a Conservative councillor pleads guilty to publishing written material to stir up racial hatred. 41-year-old childminder Lucy Connolly called for mass deportations and attacks on hotels housing asylum seekers in a post on X on the same day of the stabbings. The post has now been deleted from her X account, and she later apologised for acting on false and malicious information. Lucy is the wife of a Conservative councillor, Raymond Connolly. To Israel now, and its Prime Minister has vowed he will make Hamas pay for the killing of 6 hostages in Gaza. Speaking at a press conference in Jerusalem, Benjamin Netanyahu said that Hamas will pay a heavy price for the hostages' deaths, calling it a massacre. Now, this all comes on the same day as an Israeli court ruling that a general strike shutting much of the country's economy must end. Israel's entire economy has been striking in a bid to pressurise Benjamin Netanyahu into accepting a Gaza ceasefire deal. Back in the Commons, the government has announced it is to suspend the sale of some weapons to Israel. Foreign Secretary David Lammy said 30 out of 350 arms export licences are to end due to clear risk they could be used in a serious violation of humanitarian laws. Israel continues to face international condemnation for the growing death toll in its war against Hamas in Gaza.
But to license arms exports to Israel, we must assess their compliance with international humanitarian law, notwithstanding the abhorrence of their opponents' tactics and ideology. Third, this is not a blanket ban. This is not an arms embargo. It targets around 30, approximately 350 licenses to Israel in total for items which could be used in the current conflict in Gaza.
And finally, the government has hit at the dynamic ticket pricing that saw Oasis tickets more than double before the eyes of fans. On Saturday, those fans of the world-famous band sat in virtual queues for hours, hoping to get their hands on tickets to one of the shows next year. But at the checkout stage, the face value had rocketed, rising from £148 to £355. That's all for now. We'll see you in 1 hour's time.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Will. Now, Germany's controversial Alternative for Deutschland party has won its first ever state election. The party, which has been accused of being right-wing and extremist for its strong stance on migration, achieved nearly a third of the vote in the state election of Thuringia. However, the Christian Democratic Union, formerly Chancellor Angela Merkel's party, ruled out any possibility of governing with the AfD in coalition. The AfD has been called the dominant force in eastern Germany, and it could possibly win the election in Brandenburg in 3 weeks' time. Now, is it right that such a popular party is being obstructed from power? Well, I'm delighted to say now I'm joined by the co-founder of the AfD party, Dr. Bernd Lücke. Dr. Lücke, thank you very much for joining us on the show. Could I first get your reaction to the historic win of AfD? It's being called a truly breakthrough and seismic moment in German politics.
Good evening first. Let me first perhaps point out you introduced me as the co-founder of the AfD, which is formally correct. But today's AfD is a very different party from the party that I founded. And I left the party about almost 10 years ago due to its shift to a xenophobic agenda on which it is campaigning now. Now, in terms of the election yesterday, that was not completely unexpected because there were three driving forces, actually, which were very important in East Germany and which went in favor of the AfD. First, there is the strong discontent with our governing coalition. Second, there is much unease about the uncontrolled immigration into Germany, which is taking place. And third, in particular in East German states, and both states which were voting yesterday were East German states, there is a high degree of skepticism towards the support for Ukraine. And on all of these three issues, the AfD campaigned successfully.
And Dr. Lücke, what's been astonishing about Germany in the 9 years from 2013 to 2022, Germany experienced the highest number of illegal immigration of any European Union member state, 2.15 million. And of course, recently, we've seen an appalling spate of Islamist terror attacks. You think those two factors, I mean, you might call the AfD Islamophobic, you might call them far right, but those two factors have been preying heavily on the minds of German voters as they went to the polling booths.
Absolutely, yes. I have nothing to add to your statement. It's completely correct.
OK, so what about the direction of the party in the future? You left in 2015. You said the party had fallen irretrievably into the wrong hands. It had gone to the far right, but the electorate seemed to be responding to its message. Where do you think the party will go from here?
I don't know where the party will be going to. That very much also depends on how the party is being dealt with by, for instance, the media and the other parties in Germany. Actually, I think there is a very dangerous tendency that the more the party is portrayed as a Nazi party, and that is currently the dominant saying, the greater is the danger that the party will become even more right-wing, because the more moderate members of the party will be leaving such a party for fear of being socially stigmatized for their AfD membership. That is a process which has actually been taking place already since the party was founded. There was always a defamatory campaign against the party. But it is true that the party has voices which are xenophobic, which use language able to incite hatred against foreigners, that it is in some aspects at odds with values of our constitution. So the portrayal is not completely unfair. On the other hand, it is never recognized that there are also many reasonable people in the AfD party, and that there are also reasonable positions that the party is campaigning on. And this is probably why voters still feel that the AfD has to play a role in German politics. In particular, as you said, migration is completely dysfunctional. Migration laws are completely dysfunctional in the European Union and in Germany. And the AfD points that out over and over again. And that is not unreasonable to say so. That is probably one big reason why the party has such strong support.
And Dr. Luca, can I ask you about the perceived refusal of opposition parties to enter into any form of coalition with the AfD? Do you think that's anti-democratic? Do you think that will actually help the AfD in the future? For example, we saw in France with Le Pen's party, we saw in Britain with the Brexit movement, when the political establishment refused to acknowledge the electorate, refused to listen, refused to enter a coalition. Could that actually, rather than stamping out the AfD, could it boost their popularity, because they will portray themselves as being persecuted and oppressed?
You know, the important thing actually is that we solve the problems. That we solve the problem with uncontrolled migration, that we solve our economic problems on which the current governing coalition in Berlin is not doing very well, that we solve the problem with Ukraine. Whether the established parties do that, or whether they need to be pushed to doing that by entering in some kind of agreement with the AfD, is actually of second-order importance. But the problem currently is that the established parties are unable to tackle this issue because they themselves, stretching from the, say, liberal, conservative, Christian Democratic Party to the very, very left, do not agree on the measures to be taken. And therefore, as long as they are opposed to forming any kind of coalition or cooperation with the AfD, they block themselves in, you know, the requirement to form a government which extends, or which comprises a big or very, very different opinions on how to tackle those issues. And therefore, we don't get any solution. That's the big problem.
It's a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for your time. Co-founder of the AfD party, Dr. Bernd Luca. Thanks for your time. Absolute pleasure. Now, joining me now in the studio to discuss this is my panel, and that's the GBNews senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson, and also the former political editor of The Sun, Trevor Kavanagh. Gentlemen, good evening. Trev, could I start with you? Of course, it's being painted as ever as far right, and history, the burden of history weighs heavy, of course, upon Germany. Do you think it's fair or accurate to portray supporters of a party like this as somehow sympathising with the darker side of German political history?
Well, I think there's no doubt that some of them do, and I think the evidence is there to prove it. But I think what they are doing is representing the sheer frustration of people, not just in Germany, but across the European Union and here in Britain too. This is predictable, and in fact was predicted at the time when Angela Merkel flung open the door to 1 million migrants from Syria and other countries. And it was also predicted during the period when Tony Blair did the same here by jumping the gun and giving accession rights to a number of European countries. And the face of Europe began to change. And that accelerated during the period when people began to cross the Channel in very large numbers and across the Mediterranean too. And the knee-jerk reaction of people like Yvette Cooper and others is to brand everybody who raises a finger on or a question on this as fascist and racist. And I think that is so much that's backfired very, very badly in Germany, and I think it will backfire here in Britain. I think that you're dealing with probably the majority of the adult population here when you describe them as racist. This is not a racist issue. It's about culture, community, cohesion. And we are losing all of that at the moment. And the developments in the House of Commons, which we're going to discuss later, I think vindicate that argument.
Nigel Nelson, can I bring you in on this point? No doubt you concur with Dr. Luca there that the party has lurched irretrievably in the wrong direction. Nevertheless, the electorate has spoken out. There are very, very real concerns about uncontrolled immigration and Islamist terror in Germany, and the people have voted.
Yeah, I mean, I think I wouldn't describe them as far right in the sense they believe in the democratic process. So I think that they're more sort of populist right or radical right. What it comes down to, their Islamophobia and indeed anti-Semitism. You are talking about, especially with Germany's history, some really unfortunate things. They talk about not allowing circumcision except for medical reasons, banning kosher food, widening out their policies. They tend to be climate change deniers, or at least that they don't believe that humans have caused climate change.
Isn't that just another one of those smears that Trevor was mentioning there? Like anybody who questions the charge towards net zero is called a climate change denier. Are those labels helpful?
Well, what they're saying is it's not human made. So I mean, they go further than than most other people on that. But I mean, certainly if you look at their policies towards Jews, I mean, the idea of banning kosher food, that has got a nasty sort of echo of the 1930s about it.
But they also are against halal slaughter for similar reasons, along lines of animal cruelty.
They're Islamophobic too, yes.
It's not necessarily Islamophobic to not want halal slaughter, is it? And again, are those labels helpful?
Well, I mean, the question really is how mainstream are they? And I think, Trevor makes the point that we know there are certainly some extremists, at least within the party. But as I said, I wouldn't classify them as necessarily far right. But immigration, again, is the big issue as it's become in this country.
It's interesting, Trevor. The hard left Communist Party that also took part in this election split from the centre-left party, and they also shared the same concerns as AfD around uncontrolled immigration and the rise of unchecked Islam. So in that sense, the horseshoe connects. And not everybody can be a fascist, not everybody can be an Islamophobe. How about if people are just concerned about the state of their country? And this is the only party who listens to them.
Well, you're absolutely right about the horseshoe, because in the end, the extreme right does link up with the extreme left, and they become just deeply unpleasant, whatever you want to call them, fascist communists. But they're extreme and they are utterly intolerant. They do not represent the mainstream voting member of the public in Germany or across Europe. But because of the gap, the vacuum in policy on immigration, again, across Europe, not just here and not just in Europe, not just in Germany, there is the feeling amongst voters that their voices are not being heard, not being listened to. In fact, that they're being dismissed and insulted. And this is the reason why Nigel Farage's Reform Group has managed to do so well in the recent elections, and in terms of numbers, much better than other parties. And it's also the reason why the Tories fail so badly, because immigration is basically out of control during that 14 years of Tory rule. People are fed up. They want to have their voice listened to. They want something done. And that is now one of the key issues about the re-election of a Tory leader.
Excellent, Trevor. Nigel, great start to the show. Thank you very, very much indeed. Now, coming up this evening, the Home Secretary is called rioters racist. Yes, that again. And James Cleverly responded by slamming the government over its so-called two-tier handling of the recent unrest. He even went in on Black Lives Matter. We'll get a reaction of a Tory MP in just a moment.
weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m, followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain, followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Paul Spires is a much-loved part of this South London community.
When I first got here, it was so quiet, and after 3 months, I decided to buy myself a speaker. I started playing music. Everyone loved it.
So when 200 residents from Beckenham chipped in more than £3,000 to send a sweeper on a summer break to Portugal, it was a moment of great local spirit.
I'm overwhelmed with it. I'm just here to do a job to the best of my ability, and the way they've reacted is brilliant.
Lisa Knight, an estate agent, said she started the campaign after becoming friends with Mr Spears.
Last Monday, I bumped into him after work. It was a 30-degree day and he'd been working all day. So we stood and had a chat like we often do. And he explained to me that it was his birthday on Tuesday and he wanted to save up to go to Portugal because he's only ever been abroad once for his 60th birthday. And after he left, I decided to make the GoFundMe. So we shared it on the local Beckenham Appreciation Group on Facebook, which is huge, and it just flew away.
But Mr Spears was unable to take the trip due to his employer's rules on accepting gifts. A solution appeared when a travel company spotted an opportunity to help out.
onthebeach.com had an amazing idea to run a competition whereby Paul would be the winner. He had to be aged between the age of 62 and 64, be loved in Beckenham, have the surname Spears and love Elvis, and so he still gets to go on holiday.
Riots have matched that £3,000 to donated to who I have wanted nominated, and obviously cancer research, which they've already done.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back to GBN Tonight with me, Martin Daubney. Wow, today, James Cleverly straight out of the gate today, both launching his leadership campaign and accusing the Labour Party of abject hypocrisy. Within the last few hours, the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, made a statement to the House of Commons on the Southport attack. Let's take a listen.
In Bolton, clashes between rival groups involved fireworks and bottles thrown. And we saw people targeted on the streets because of the colour of their skin. This disgraceful disorder and racist hatred, including that whipped up by a hateful minority online, was an insult to those grieving over Southport.
Well, Yvette Cooper there doubling down on the racist rhetoric, and here's what James Cleverly had to say in direct response to that. Got a bit spicy.
And does she now also recognise that the Labour leadership kneeling in the immediate aftermath of the Black Lives Matter disorder, when violent protesters attacked police officers, looks like her party takes some forms of violence less seriously than other forms of violence? And does she accept that any perception whatsoever of treating the same crimes differently based on the race, religion or community of the perpetrators increases tension rather than reduces it?
I told you got a bit spicy, didn't I? And joining me now to discuss this is James Wilde, the Conservative MP for North West Norfolk. And also, of course, still with my panel of GB News' senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and the former political editor of The Sun, Trevor Kavanagh. Let's start with you, James Wilde. I thought that was a bit frisky. So James Cleverly launched his campaign earlier on today and he was straight out the bat off the back of a speech by Yvette Cooper that was meant to be sombre, earnest in its tone about the riots and what we learned from them. Cleverly fired straight back and brought in the Black Lives Matter, taking the knee moment, and also hit out at Keir Starmer and, for good measures, London Mayor Sadiq Khan for being silent on the 2 deaths at Notting Hill. What do you make of that exchange?
Well, he clearly had his Weetabix this morning. I think we want to see the police act without fear or favour when they're policing any of these protests or disruption. We want to see politicians equally condemning lawlessness wherever the organisation is that's causing it is coming from. So I think that's the point that James was trying to get across this afternoon.
We were talking earlier about AfD, just won a landmark election in Germany. One of the points that Trevor Kavanagh made was that when you keep calling people racist and far right all the time, in the end, it ceases to have no impact. Is Yvette Cooper falling into the same trap there? Because it's interesting, is it not, that we saw in the aftermath of the 2011 riots, indeed, the Black Lives Matter riots, Monday morning they took the knee, Saturday the riots happened. Mr. Cleverly's point was there seems to be a very different reaction when the violence is coming from a certain community.
Well, as I say, we need to condemn all violence and it all needs to be dealt with robustly. I think there are people, as we saw at the election, with concerns around immigration, whether that's legal or illegal. And one of the reasons that the Conservative Party, my party, lost that election was because we hadn't dealt with that issue. And that's why we do need to do that to win back the trust of the people.
Talk of which, there are 2 leadership pictures today. James Cleverly said 3% of GDP on defence, bring back the Rwanda bill, even though it didn't get a single person off the ground voluntarily. Scrap stamp duty. Kemi Badenoch, we were told off, by the way, for calling her Badenoch. It's Badenoch with a Y. That told us off. Calling the Labour Party clueless, irresponsible and dishonest. What do you make of the 2 pictures today?
Well, look, I'm backing Tom Tugendhat, who's launching his campaign tomorrow morning. We've got a strong set of candidates who are vying to be the leader of the Conservative Party. I think Tom's best placed with the character, with his record of service, to lead our party and to win back the trust. He's someone who acts on his convictions. We've seen that over the national insurance rise, which he voted against, as well as the pandemic, when he voted against the COVID passport. So I think he's the best person.
Tom Tugendhat at the moment only has, I think, about 5 or 6 MPs publicly support him. Of course, not many have declared yet, but the 2 frontrunners in terms of those who have declared appear to be Robert Jenrick and Miss Badenoch. Do you think the membership will get the 2 people that they would like to get the job, or will they get the 2 people that you guys decide should get the job?
Well, we've seen Tom's been out over 100 constituencies visited over the last few weeks. The other candidates have been out, been hustings. The membership have seen them. We've seen polls of what the members think, and all MPs, I'm talking to my association members, who they think the best candidate is as well. And we'll now see tomorrow, we have the first hustings in Parliament for MPs and then the first vote on Wednesday, and then we'll see where the numbers are. I think half the party roughly have declared where they are at the moment. A lot of colleagues are waiting to see how everyone performs tomorrow. So it's a big day, it's an important day.
Interesting poll out today. It's got the Labour Party down by 4 points, the Reform Party up 5, Conservatives up 2. You haven't got a leader. Maybe just don't have a leader. It's the only +2 points you've put on in months.
Well, we'll see. We took a hammering at the election, and that's because we lost the trust of people. When we have a leader, we'll be able to start rebuilding that trust and take the fight to Keir Starmer. We've already seen whacking pensioners by taking away their winter fuel payments, all the other decisions, letting people out of prison early. These aren't things that were mentioned at the election. We haven't even seen the big tax rises that are going to be coming in a matter of weeks. OK, James, well, super. Let's bring in my panel now, Nigel and Trevor. Nigel, to you first. What do you make of the exchange there? It was robust. There were a lot of loud intakes of gasping air.
Yeah, weren't there?
This was meant to be the moment where Yvette Cooper was owning the stage, and James Cleverly hit straight back. He got a glove on the chin, I felt.
Yeah, but the whole thing is, I think you've got to work on the basis all these things are different. So when you were dealing with the recent riots, this was actually bordering on insurrection, and covered an awful lot of the country. That the Black Lives Matter, yes, there was disruption, but there weren't the riots of the kind of level that we've just seen.
But there were 140 arrests in 2 days. A lot of police officers were injured, and Keir Starmer's reaction on the Monday morning was to take the knee.
The point was that the rioting was of a different degree, and the big danger was that would have spread unless it had been clamped down on immediately. And there was a lot of it was based on racism. So I can see why Yvette Cooper makes a distinction between these various things.
Trevor.
Well, I think that the point is that when the demonstrations over Black Lives Matter took place, there was deep concern about the way that the police turned a blind eye, especially considering the circumstances of COVID and so on.
The police took the knee.
The police took the knee. Now, we didn't have the comparison then of the riots we've just seen, but I think we did know that the police were operating on a two-tier basis of policing. And that is unacceptable in any society because you need the consent of the people to policing. Police are supposed to be citizens in uniform. If they're taking one side against the other and supporting these dividing lines, the sort of politics of identity, then I think all of those who are left behind by that sort of attitude get very angry about it. And I think that, again, it's dismissing everyone as a racist that really gets into the core of people who feel just they don't like the way things are going, but so they're being branded as something extreme and unpleasant. And I don't think that's going to be acceptable.
Do you think it's a fair point, though, Nigel, to point out it's like, 6 weeks now since the attack at Manchester Airport? Nobody's been charged, let alone prosecuted for that. And yet we've seen people, hauled away to prison, toot sweet if they make a Facebook post that the government doesn't agree with.
Again, two separate things. I mean, what happened
at
Manchester... Well, they are, because what happened at Manchester Airport, it is now going through the whole criminal justice system. And you're absolutely right, nothing's actually happened.
There's no 24-hour overnight court to deal with it sharpish.
Well, if you're dealing with the rioters, the important thing is that you want to make sure that the riots stop. And the answer in doing that is to have instant justice and exemplary sentences, which is what happened. And that put a stop to the riots. I think when you're dealing with essentially a crime incident, matter for the police at whatever level, at whatever speed they need to go at to do their investigation.
Trevor, you think it's fair that we haven't had any attempts to have a conversation about the underlying reasons why do people feel so frustrated they take to the streets? Nobody's excusing the riots that happened in Southport and the other 7 towns across England, which happen to have high levels of social deprivation. They also happen to have the highest level of asylum seekers in all of the United Kingdom. There's been no conversation about that, just condemnation.
You can't have a conversation when the vocabulary has been hijacked by one side. So that as soon as you start to suggest what might be the cause of this, or that there are certain factors which need to be taken into account, you are immediately branded as an Islamophobe or a racist or some other brand that is immediately a silence. It's a form of gagging or censorship. So you can't have a debate.
Okay, Trevor, Nigel, excellent again, and thank you, James World, for joining me in the studio. Now, coming up next, we'll be discussing Jeremy Corbyn's new parliamentary group that has the same strength as the Reform Party. Are we seeing a much touted and predicted move by Nigel Farage towards sectarian politics? That's coming next.
Good evening. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. We've seen some big thunderstorms through the day today. Still a few rumbling on at the moment, but they are going to fade overnight. Tomorrow, a mix of sunshine and showers, and it is steadily turning fresher from the west. Quite warm and humid, though, in places at the moment. Our air is coming up from the south. This low pressure generating the heavy thundery showers, steadily clearing from northeast Scotland and then the Northern Isles. But some storms rumbling on well into this evening over parts of the Midlands, Northern England and Wales. They should start to ease through the early hours. Still quite warm and humid and murky over central and eastern parts, but turning fresher and cooler further north and west. Temperatures in parts of Scotland well down into single figures. Generally a fine and a sunny start across Scotland tomorrow as well. Certainly a much brighter, drier day across the northeast. But in western Scotland, a line of cloud and rain is creeping back in. That's extending down into Northern Ireland, so a pretty glum start to proceedings tomorrow here. Quite a lot of mist and low clouds still across parts of England and Wales as well, and still a few showers here, still keeping going through the morning, so you may wake up to a bit of a wet start here. And as we go through the day, we could see some further heavy showers developing over parts of East Anglia and maybe the far southeast of England. Still hit and miss, but some heavy downpours possible, particularly in the early afternoon. Much of northern England, Wales, southwest England, though, drier and brighter compared to today. And we'll still have some outbreaks of rain coming into the far northwest. Turning cooler and fresher, we could still get into the 20s across East Anglia and the southeast. And certainly a cooler, fresher start across eastern areas for Wednesday morning. Again, many places seeing plenty of sunny spells, but we will see more showers developing as we go through the day, particularly for Wales and England, Northern Ireland. Not too many, though, across Scotland. And temperatures much fresher feel by Wednesday, high teens for most.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GBN tonight with me, Martin Daubney. Now, next story, Jeremy Corbyn. Yeah, remember him, the former Labour leader? Well, he's collaborating with 4 pro-Gaza independent MPs to create a left-wing bloc in Parliament. The Independent Alliance includes Corbyn, Ayub Khan, Shaukat Adam, Iqbal Mohammed and Adnan Hussain, but has formed and now an official party. Now, they've already criticised Labour's decision to cut pensioners' winter fuel allowance, and they've released a statement saying that they were elected to provide hope in Parliament of despair, and that they believe in a more equal and peaceful world. Now, the bloc has 5 MPs, which puts it on the same footing as Reform UK in Parliament. Well, joining me now to discuss this is Graham Stringer, the Labour MP for Blackley and Middleton South. And, of course, I'm still with my panel, GB News' senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and the former political editor of The Sun, Trevor Kavanagh. I got the name right this time.
No.
Graham Stringer, let's turn to you. Jeremy Corbyn has been shoved outside the tent for some time now. We all know the reasons why. His Labour Party was the only party, apart from the BNP, that was investigated for allegations of racism. No way back for him now, it seems. And now he's formed this motley alliance with a bunch of MPs, which Nigel Farage would say they embody sectarian politics. What's your take on this?
No, I sort of rather agree with that. I mean, Jeremy went past any possible defence of him and his politics when he laid a wreath for Black September in Tunisia. Black September, you'll remember, were a group that murdered Israeli athletes at the 1972 Munich Olympic Games, and they murdered them because they were Jewish for no other reason. So it was a racist murder. So I think that put Jeremy beyond the pale. He's always referred to Hamas in Gaza as friends. So I suppose he is happier now. He won't have to dance on the head of a pin about whether he really is friends with terrorist organisations or not.
And when you look at the population makeup of these seats, Dewsbury and Batley, 52% Muslim population. Birmingham, Perry, Bar, 30%. Leicester South, 30%. Blackburn, 35%. Now, Nigel Farage said all along he fears we'll see sectarian politics emerging. This is clearly along lines of religion. They might talk about wishing for a more peaceful world, but actually this is a pro-Palestine sectarian political movement, is it not?
pro-Hamas, I think, rather than Palestine. I mean, many of us would make that distinction. One wants justice for the people who live in Gaza, but that's impossible while they are repressed by the terrorist organisation Hamas. I didn't go to any of those constituencies during the general election, but I have talked to people who did, and it was straightforward politics of telling people in the mosques to support them, that the Labour Party was anti-Muslim, which we're not, and to vote for them because they were supporting Hamas and the Palestinians in Gaza, and all the other issues that those constituencies have. Those constituencies not only have large numbers of Muslims, there are other problems of poverty and education in those constituencies that weren't dealt with. And I don't know the man, but I watched the maiden speech of the member for Leicester South, and it was quite simply appalling. It was a massive distortion of what had actually happened in that election. If you listen to the speech, it was all peace and light. You know, they were all friends. All the candidates were friends. It was nonsense and offensive.
And it's worth pointing out that Iqbal Mohammed, who's the MP for Dewsbury and Batley, Kelsaprees, not a single mention of the Batley Grammar School teacher 3 years on, still in hiding with his family in fear of their lives. And to be fair, the Labour Party MP has never stood up for that teacher either previously.
Well, he should have done.
Good.
Basically.
I'm glad you agree on that. Now, moving on, there was a lot of talk during the general election about this kind of collective impacting on the vote of the Labour Party. In fact, these were Labour seats that swung over. Today, David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, announced something of a change of position, many would feel. Initially, before the general election, Sir Keir Starmer was adamant that Israel had the right to defend itself and protect its borders in response to those grotesque terrorist attacks on October the 7th. Today, David Lammy has announced 30 companies will no longer be supplying military goods to Israel. Is that a difference of opinion? That's a very different position. Some people are saying that is not supporting Israel.
I've not heard the detail of that. I know that the UK probably provides less than 1% of Israel's defence, and most of it is not used in the conflict with Hamas or Hezbollah, for that matter. So I don't know the details. But when Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran have as their policy the eradication of Israel and the murder of Jews, then Israel and the Jews who live in Israel have an absolute right to defend themselves. They're our allies, and we should provide them with the equipment to defend themselves.
Might Jeremy Corbyn's move today embolden more radical candidates out there to join this coalition? And could that be a headache for the Labour Party?
Well, it's possible. I think there is a serious rethink that many of the leaders of the Muslim community and of the Labour Party need to think about our relationship. The vast majority of Muslims in this country have voted for Labour. Quite frankly, they believed that the Conservative Party was racist, and probably 30 or 40 years ago they were right. That's changed. And the world has changed within the Muslim community. Gaza is an issue that worries them. They're angry about it. I represent a large number of Muslims. So I think the leadership of the Muslim community and the Labour Party have to think out their position. But it must be based on firm principles, not just vote for us because we'll do what you want us to. I've had some very robust conversations with the Muslims I represent, saying that actually, just because they have their view, and there are a large number of Muslims, doesn't mean I can necessarily support them. Decisions I make as a Member of Parliament, and I assume for the vast majority of other Members of Parliament, has to be based on our judgment of what is right for this country and what is right in the most general terms for our constituents.
Great stuff, Graham Stringer. And let's bring in my panel now, Trevor and Nigel. Trevor, let's start with you. The Labour Party for a long time has had a Corbyn problem. How big a problem is it this time?
I think it's a very, very significant and sinister problem. Graham Stringer, in my experience, has always been a very sensible and moderate and rational member of the Labour Party. And he says that he represents the majority. But if he does, it's the silent majority. And I think that the problem for the Labour Party is that it's now in thrall to the more extreme and aggressive members of the Muslim community. What you're seeing here is the embryonic beginning of the Islamic Party in the House of Commons, which is totally out of sync with our history of democracy. Islam is not compatible with democracy in any case. As far as Muslims generally are concerned, the world belongs to Allah, not to the voters. So this is a really dangerous step, and it will, I think, expand. We will see more such MPs being elected on a Muslim ticket rather than a British political ticket.
Nigel, is that fair? I mean, Jeremy Corbyn maintained for a long, long time while he was inside the tent that he was in no way representative of this more extreme end of the Islamic community. Has the veil slipped now?
No, I mean, I think that the use of the word Islamist is going far too far.
I changed it to Islamic.
Oh, fine, OK, sorry. You've got people here that not supporting Hamas. If they were supporting Hamas during the election campaign, they would have been arrested, I would have thought. So what they're doing is they're supporting...
I'm not sure about that.
No, I'm not sure about that.
There was serious literature put out which the police refused to investigate. Most of it didn't have the imprint of the agent on it, but it was supporting the candidates. When in Greater Manchester we approached the police and said this is unlawful, they refused to investigate it.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow, what did they say to you?
They basically said, we don't know who put the leaflets out. That was what they said both to the police commissioner appointed by Andy Burnham and to different candidates.
Astonishing. Does that feed into that earlier point? There seems to be a very different pursuit of justice
I'm
and
sorry,
the law.
but from what Graham has said, I'm surprised that there was no investigation whatsoever. And at the moment, obviously, we're in an unproven territory about whether it was sponsored by these individuals or by somebody else. But yes, from what you've said there, Graham, I'm astonished that the police didn't even look into that because quite clearly support for Hamas is an offence.
Are you astonished by that, Trevor? Or
I was
actually...
just about to interject. No, I'm not. Frankly, this is the way of the world now in Britain, and it's extremely worrying. I mean, it isn't just on this occasion. You've got Rotherham and Rochdale, where the police did not intervene or investigate or prosecute until absolutely forced to do so by the Times newspaper. And this is the problem across... when we talk about two-tier policing, it isn't just happening now. It's been happening for a very long time.
OK, thank you very much, Nigel, Trevor and Graham. Thank you very much for joining us. Superb debate now. Now, the homelessness crisis is literally on the government's doorstep. Sleeping rough in Westminster is on the rise, and guess what? More than half of them are immigrants. That's coming next.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
An army veteran has become the world's most tattooed woman after a 10-year journey to ink 99.98% of her body. I mean, that's really nearly everywhere. But I wonder, I mean, yes, she is unusual, and you'd know her if you met her, frankly, wouldn't you? But are tattoos acceptable they're becoming more and more acceptable just amongst all of us, aren't they? But what about in the workplace?
99.98% of her body tattooed. Do you think this would affect the way that she is received at work?
I do affect it would how she is seen at work, just purely because tattoos are still so stigmatised in the workplace. In today's rapidly evolving society, the traditional standards of what is socially acceptable are being redefined. Facial tattoos, full body tattoos, once stigmatised, are increasingly seen as a form of personal expression, and there shouldn't be a barrier to one's professional or social life.
If you are
going for a job, for instance. We make up 90% of our minds about somebody within the first 3 seconds. And I have written a book on body language, and the face is just so important. You need to have the smile, you need to be able to read the facial expression, even when we're speaking. Now, if the face is really heavily tattooed, you can't do that.
Jade said that there is still this stigma, particularly to facial tattoos. We do judge people with tattoos, don't we?
We do. Unfortunately, we do, because it's not the norm. And as a human being, we tend to judge what is not the norm. And as Jade says, we are getting much more used to it. It is much more socially acceptable. But a lot of firms will say, if you've got a tattoo, you cover it. We don't want tattoos in the workplace.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GBN Tonight with me, Martin Daubney. Now, as MPs return to Parliament today, they're being told by charities that homelessness is a political choice. London's number of rough sleepers has now surpassed pre-pandemic levels, and according to reports, it's risen by an astonishing 39% within the past year alone. Now, the matter has been exacerbated through the influx of foreign nationals, because over half of the homeless people in London are now from abroad, many of whom have been granted refugee status. Well, the issue remains and a fresh, bold attitude from the current class of politicians is needed to make any form of progress. Well, joining me now to discuss this is the former Labour advisor Matthew Torbit, who himself was homeless as a teenager. Matthew, always a pleasure to have you in the studio. Before we turn to the detail of this report, homelessness as a political choice, I'm assuming that sticks in your craw.
No, I think it could be argued it's a political choice, and I'll tell you why. Because during the COVID pandemic, we housed everybody. We ensured, for public safety reasons, and rightfully so, that people were put in hotels. Now, albeit temporarily, but it showed it to me that if the political will is there, it could be done. And I think the government of today and the government of previous years would say, you know, but it's totally unsustainable, it's going to cost us a lot of money. So I think, well, that's on you, because successive governments haven't invested in enough social housing, haven't tackled things like renters reform, haven't invested in preventative measures, particularly for people coming out of social care, people coming out of prison, those that have come in through the wrong end of the asylum system, a whole manner of things, as well as the large cuts made to local authority budgets.
And Matthew, that brings me to my next point. You echo a sentiment made by many, many thousands of GB News viewers. If we can find £8 million a day to house asylum seekers, why can't we find that money to house our homeless? But they would say to house British homeless. There's no denying these numbers are astonishing. 55.4% of all people sleeping rough in Britain, in London now, beg your pardon, are immigrants. Surely you could halve the problem in London if you just had tighter border control.
Maybe so, but it doesn't. For me, you're just sort of moving the problem on a little bit more, because what do you still do with those that are still homeless, regardless of what nationality they are? I think the main thing is, and I will always say this, is that there needs to be greater investment in preventative measures. And homelessness is something that touches on all levels of government departments. It's obviously a lot healthier for the health department if somebody is in a house. If somebody is housed, they're more likely to be in work, therefore contributing towards the exchequer and towards tax and national insurance. Those that are coming out of the justice system, they're having help finding their way into temporary accommodation or otherwise, and therefore not on the streets, potentially reoffending. Reoffending costs us £20 billion a year, impacts all different levels. And I think, you know, tighter borders may play a case, but ultimately we're still failing our own people.
Well, the picture you're just watching on your screen there, by the way, that's an encampment at Park Lane. That's London's most expensive postcode. Now, I go past this most days on my way to work. The community camping out there, they don't get moved on. They don't get shoved around by the Mayor of London, and I wonder why that is. Well, I will tell you that everybody on that site is from abroad, an immigrant, and they're camping out there in the most expensive part of Britain. And I've got to say, often I walk past, they're having a barbecue, they're drinking beers. I'm not saying that they're having the life of Riley, but why aren't they being moved on? It's an eyesore, they leave rubbish everywhere, and it gives a bad name it sends out a bad message to British taxpayers.
So I can't tell you why they've not been moved on. That's ultimately up for the Mayor of London to sort of answer to. I'll tell you why they're probably there is because they probably feel safe. That's got to be one of the most well-protected postcodes in the country. And I'll tell you why feeling safe is important. When I spent time on the streets, I cannot tell you the fear that still stays within you when you're in a city centre, you're bedding down for the night, and you hear the shuffle of footsteps growing closer and closer. You hear the drunk and angry voices getting louder and louder, and you're almost flinching, waiting for that kick in the face or for somebody to urinate on you. They're not going to get towards them in that central reservation, so that's probably why. OK, Matthew Talbot, thank you. We have to leave it there, and I'm joined in the studio by Jacob Rees-Mogg. Of course, State of the Nation is up next. What's on your menu,
It is indeed. Well, we're going to talk about the fact that the Labour Party hates the economy, that it is only supporting its friends. So if you're a trade unionist, you're getting lots of money, but if you're business, you're getting lots of regulation because it assumes employees can't sign fair contracts. We're going to be doing that. And then, I'm very pleased to say, we've got an interview with Henry Newman, who's been calling for civil service reform and has exposed some of the sleaze around the Labour civil service appointments, where cronies have been appointed, donors have mysteriously got passes to Downing Street, and he's arguing the case for civil service reform and for proper standards.
Is he also arguing, as you were, they should get back to work?
Well, I'm sure we'll touch on that. We were discussing whether Larry the Cat is the one civil servant who actually goes into work.
Super stuff. Jacob Rees-Mogg, always a pleasure. That's coming up straight after this show. Matthew Talbot, of course, always a pleasure to have you in. Thanks for your company tonight. Now, don't forget, if you haven't had enough of me, I'll be back tomorrow, 3 till 6 on the Martin Dalby Show. Thanks for all your opinions. Keep the messages coming in. And it's now time for your weather with Alex Deacon. And don't forget, next up, State of the Nation with Jacob Rees-Mogg. Have a great evening.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. We've seen some big thunderstorms through the day today. Still a few rumbling on at the moment, but they are going to fade overnight. Tomorrow, a mix of sunshine and showers, and it is steadily turning fresher from the west. Quite warm and humid, though, in places at the moment. Our air is coming up from the south. This low pressure generating the heavy, thundery showers, steadily clearing from northeast Scotland and then the Northern Isles. But some storms rumbling on well into this evening over parts of the Midlands, Northern England and Wales. They should start to ease through the early hours. Still quite warm and humid and murky over central and eastern parts, but turning fresher and cooler further north and west. Temperatures in parts of Scotland well down into single figures. Generally a fine and a sunny start across Scotland tomorrow as well. Certainly a much brighter, drier day across the northeast. But in western Scotland, a line of cloud and rain is creeping back in. That's extending down into Northern Ireland, so a pretty glum start to proceedings tomorrow here. Quite a lot of mist and low clouds still across parts of England and Wales as well, and still a few showers here, still keeping going through the morning, so you may wake up to a bit of a wet start here. And as we go through the day, we could see some further heavy showers developing over parts of East Anglia and maybe the far southeast of England. Still hit and miss, but some heavy downpours possible, particularly in the early afternoon. Much of northern England, Wales, southwest England, though, drier and brighter compared to today. And we'll still have some outbreaks of rain coming into the far northwest. Turning cooler and fresher, we could still get into the 20s across East Anglia and the southeast. And certainly a cooler, fresher start across eastern areas for Wednesday morning. Again, many places seeing plenty of sunny spells, but we will see more showers developing as we go through the day, particularly for Wales and England, Northern Ireland. Not too many, though, across Scotland. And temperatures much fresher feel by Wednesday.